I want to know about you.
Okay.
Why are you this person as far as food goes?
I think I've always been interested in food, and because my family has always been really, my mother was a great cook, my grandmother's a great cook. We always, food was such a focus of our home, and not like fancy food either. Like, in fact, my mother, I remember saying she never bought Mastering the Art of French Cooking because she couldn't afford the book.
Is that right?
It was sort of at a sort of higher price point than she was comfortable spending on a cookbook.
Right.
So, but she made everything from scratch. She was kind of the classic kind of American home cook. She made pot roasts and things like that, but she made her own bread, and she canned, and she made jams. And I think that kind of all, infused.
Well, if you grow up in that environment, then surely you think maybe this is something I want to do myself.
Yeah, but I never thought it was like a profession. I just sort of thought, oh, everyone eats this way.
Is it a profession actually? And do you think of it as a profession for you? You didn't actually become a chef,
right,
although you did study with chefs.
Yes, it didn't become a profession until I started writing,
right,
and after I had done some cooking.
In other words, did you set out to make it your profession? Was it more accidental or was it deliberate?
It was deliberate, but I wasn't sure where I was going to land. Like, I started by working in restaurants and bakeries, and then I went to Europe and did the same there. And I thought, oh, maybe I'd become a bread baker. Oh, but I'd like to write someday. And then it was just kind of a matter of, trying out a bunch of different things, and then trying to write. I was actually a finance major in college, so I never really wrote before.
You wouldn't have amounted to anything actually doing that, right? Tell me about your time during college. You worked at there's a story that you worked in a bakery. You actually drove bread.
Oh yeah.
Around, so you worked overnight in the bakery, and then you delivered the bread that you made.
Yeah. I would start work on Saturday night, and it was this very small bakery, and it was just at the beginning of like this kind of European bread craze. And so it was a very exciting place to be, and we would mix the dough and shape it. It was like 3 women working together, and then I would pack it up, and then I would put it in a delivery truck and drive it around to all the nice restaurants in Boston at like 5 a.m.
You really did start at the bottom, actually.
Oh yeah, I did.
And when you went overseas to cook, where exactly were you and for how long? And talk a bit about that.
Well, it was very common to actually do apprenticeships around Europe. So what I did was I started in Germany. I worked at a bread bakery there. And then I moved to Switzerland and worked in a bread bakery there. And I worked in Italy and Rome at a famous bakery called the Forno Campo dei Fiori, which actually has kind of inspired those like meter-long pizzas that you now see, and a lot of other things. And I also worked in Paris, and I sort of bopped around.
But at what point did you transition from doing it to writing about it?
When I ended up, my last sort of stop in Europe was again in France, in Burgundy. I worked for Anne Willan, who is a well-known cookbook writer and also the founder of La Varenne Cooking School. And I worked for her, and I was kind of her editorial assistant, so I worked with her on her cookbooks. And I became really interested in her gardener, who lived on the property. She has this beautiful 17th century chateau in Burgundy, and so I lived there, and I cooked from the garden, and I was just really inspired to sort of tell the story of the gardener. I felt like there was something to be told because I could see that his lifestyle was completely dying out in France.
And this became the basis for your first
That's
book.
right.
Yeah. And from that, then, you got into doing this more as a... This became your part of the business.
Exactly, and then I got hired at the Times from there.
You wrote something like 500, 600, 800, some incredible number of stories in the Times over the years, very prolific stuff. What kind of stories, when you would write about food, were of interest to you? More about cooking and ingredients, more about restaurants? I mean, you were not actually a restaurant
I always actually like writing
critic,
about, I like writing about people.
Yeah,
so I think of, stories like Julie Powell. I wrote about Julie Powell when she was writing her blog.
This is Julie and Julia, the origins of that.
I mean, she's a great character, and she was doing this, she had taken on this daunting task, and it was a great tale. And I wrote about Fergus Henderson, who's he's the owner of St. John Restaurant, which has inspired all of this, kind of getting back to eating all parts of the animal. I'm sorry, I know you're vegetarian, but
I'll sit here calmly while you're talking about this.
But he's this amazing entrepreneur and person, and so I actually like writing about people. In fact, my first book was about this gardener, really, but it kind of food was surrounding it. My second book is really about my husband and our courtship, but food is kind of an accoutrement.
I want to ask you about that. So your husband became a character in a lot of the work that you did for the Times primarily. He was christened Mr. Latte, so that people don't think we're hiding the ball here.
Yeah.
He is Tad Friend, who's a writer for the New Yorker magazine.
That's right.
What is the origin of Mr. Latte? Before we get into the book itself, what's the origin of the nickname?
The nickname, well, so...
Although I'm guessing it has to do with latte.
Yes, it does.
Doesn't require very much of me to actually make that assumption. But.
So we were set up on a blind date, and he took me to a quite horrible restaurant and ordered a Budweiser to start.
Started off well, didn't it, actually? Right, yeah.
It was a tough date.
Yeah.
And then ended by ordering a latte after dinner. And I sort of nicknamed him Mr. Latte because to sort of emphasize sort of my foodiness and his non-foodiness.
Is ordering a latte make you not a foodie? Shall I stop ordering latte?
After dinner, you don't like Italians would never order a coffee drink that has milk in it after a meal, because after a meal you want the espresso, which kind of has a crisp punctuation to your meal.
So he really blew it.
Well, by American standards, it was completely acceptable. Right. But those were back in my snooty days.
You're not snooty now,
no,
so
I'm over
anything
it.
with the remainder of this program. We reveal anything, I'm not going to end up. So that was indeed your second book. So you wrote about that, but food was at the center of that book as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I feel like food is a jumping off point for talking, writing about other things.